Dear viewers, welcome. Today, you and I are climbing into the cockpit of one of World War II's most distinctive warbirds, a fighter that looked strange at first glance, was mocked in some quarters, then proved so fast, so accurate, and so relentless that Axis pilots learned to fear it. This is the story of the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, the twin-boom, nose-gun, long-range predator that hunted over two oceans, escorted bombers deep into hostile skies, intercepted high-value targets, shredded supply lines, and produced America's two top-scoring aces of the entire war. Everything you're about to hear is grounded in documented history. No myths for the sake of drama, no fiction, just a hard-hitting human story of engineering, adaptation, and combat. Hook. Why the Lightning mattered. Picture a formation of heavy bombers droning toward their target. The flak will be heavy, the Luftwaffe poised to pounce. Ahead and above, strange silhouettes with twin tails and a single central cockpit fan out, conserving altitude and speed. When enemy fighters dive in, the twin-tailed shapes tip their noses, deliver a single surgical burst from a cluster of guns mounted in the nose, then climb out on the power of two supercharged engines. In the Pacific, those same shapes range hundreds of miles over open ocean, because if an engine coughs, there's another to bring you home. This was the P-38's edge: reach, accuracy, survivability, and punch. Origins: from a blank sheet to a twin-boom predator. Lockheed's P-38 was born before the United States entered the war, when the U.S. Army Air Corps asked for a high-performance, high-altitude interceptor that could outclimb and outrun anything flying. Designers Hall Hibbard and a young Clarence Kelly Johnson responded with something radical. Two booms, housing Allison V-1710 engines with turbo-superchargers, a central nacelle for the pilot and armament, and counter-rotating propellers to tame torque. It looked unconventional because it was. The layout solved problems that single-engine fighters wrestled with in 1937-1938, cooling, drag, engine reliability at altitude, and concentration of fire. The prototype, XP-38, first flew in January 1939. Just weeks later, test pilot Benjamin Kelsey attempted a transcontinental dash to demonstrate the aircraft's potential. He almost made it. The prototype crash-landed on approach in New York after carburetor icing starved the engines. The design had shown its speed and promise. Now the hard work of refining it began. What made the P-38 different? Two engines, two turbos. Each Allison V-1710 sat behind a General Electric turbo-supercharger in the tail of its boom, feeding dense air to the engine for power at high altitude. That meant excellent climb and speed up where bombers flew, and where interceptors needed to fight. Guns in the nose, a 20mm Hispano cannon and four 50-caliber Browning machine guns fired along the aircraft's centerline. No convergence, no spread. At combat ranges, a short burst put dense, lethal fire exactly where the pilot aimed. Counter-rotating props. The propellers spun outward at the top, reducing torque effects during takeoff and hard maneuvering. If a pilot lost one engine, the Lightning remained controllable with proper rudder and aileron inputs, critical over water. Long legs. With drop tanks, the P-38 could escort deep or hunt far, one of the war's first true long-range fighters. Early combat and hard lessons. The earliest production Lightnings suffered teething problems and the realities of wartime logistics. Britain ordered a batch, Model 322, without turbo-superchargers, an expedient decision during desperate times. Performance without turbos lagged. Those aircraft saw limited use. The US versions with turbos were a different animal, but even they had issues to solve. Cockpit heating in the European winter, engine management quirks, and aerodynamic compressibility in high-speed dives. Pilots learned quickly, sometimes the hard way, that near transonic dives could lock the tail and stiffen controls. Lockheed and the Army responded with dive recovery flaps on later J-25 and L models to tame the problem. It worked. Mediterranean and European theatres, mixed reputation, serious results. The P-38 entered combat with the US Army Air Forces in late 1942-1943. Over North Africa, Sicily and Italy, Lightnings performed well. Their range and twin-engine reliability were tailor-made for the wide Mediterranean. They escorted bombers, swept ahead of formations to clear airspace, and ranged deep to interdict rail lines and airfields. Post-war accounts often repeat that German pilots dubbed it the fork-tailed devil, Gabelschwanzteufel. Whatever the nickname's exact provenance, Axis units learned to respect it. In Northwest Europe, the Lightning's record was more complicated. Early models struggled with cockpit cold and engine surging in winter conditions. Maintenance and operating procedures improved, and later J and L variants remedied many issues. Even so, by spring 1944, the P-51 Mustang's exceptional high-altitude efficiency with the Merlin engine made it the principal long-range escort in the 8th Air Force. That did not make the P-38 a failure. It simply slid into roles where it excelled: fighter-bomber work, photo reconnaissance, and missions demanding long reach and heavy fire. Pacific Theater, where the Lightning truly shined. Over water and across vast distances, the P-38 came into its own. Twin engines meant confidence for pilots far from land. Range with drop tanks meant you could go where single-engine fighters hesitated. In New Guinea's heat and sudden storms, on the long pushes to the Philippines, and over the Central Pacific's island chains, the Lightning was a mainstay. It escorted bombers, swept the skies, and hammered ground targets with bombs and rockets. Two facts underscore its dominance in the theatre. America's top two aces of WWII, Richard Bong, 40 victories, and Thomas Maguire, 38, flew P-38s almost exclusively. One of the war's most famous interceptions, Operation Vengeance in April 1943, was a P-38 mission. Operation Vengeance, the long-range intercept that changed a war leaderboard. On April 18, 1943, U.S. codebreakers learned that Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of Pearl Harbor, would fly from Rabaul to Balale. The mission window, altitude, and route were known. Only one fighter had the range to ambush him from Guadalcanal and return, the P-38, carrying drop tanks. 16 P-38s from the 339th Fighter Squadron, 347th Fighter Group, led by Major John Mitchell, flew a precisely timed, low-altitude approach to avoid radar. Near Bougainville, they climbed into the intercept box and engaged two Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers and their Zero escorts. Both bombers went down. Yamamoto died in the jungle. There remains a long-running debate over which pilot, Rex T. Barber or Thomas Lanphier, fired the fatal bursts. Official credit at the time was shared, and later reassessments have shifted weight toward Barber. What's uncontested is the P-38's role. Only the Lightning could fly the mission profile, and the unit executed with precision. Aces and tactics. How the Lightning won. Richard Bong, a quiet, methodical pilot from Wisconsin, did not win by showy aerobatics. He stalked, used altitude and position, fired short, accurate bursts from those nose guns, and disengaged cleanly. Thomas Maguire, equally lethal, refined energy tactics and formation discipline. Charles H. MacDonald, Gerald Johnson, and many others built their scores the same way. Pick the fight on your terms, use the Lightning's climb, keep your speed, strike from advantage, and don't linger to turn with nimble opponents. The P-38 could fight in the vertical. It accelerated hard with two engines, and it dove like a stone. Once dive recovery flaps arrived, it could also get out of that dive safely. Armament and accuracy. Why nose guns mattered. Most WWII fighters mounted guns in the wings, requiring convergence to a set distance. The P-38's fire came straight from the nose. At 300-400 yards, a short squeeze put a dense stream of 50 caliber bullets and 20mm shells into the target's cockpit or engine. Bomber pilots felt the difference when Lightnings attacked. No walking the traces in from one wing or the other, just a solid, central hit. On the ground, those same guns shredded trucks, locomotives, and parked aircraft. From interceptor to fighter bomber, the Lightning's second life in Europe. By mid-1944 in the European theatre, the Allied goal was not flashy dogfights, but relentless interruption of German movement and supply. The P-38 was ideal: stable delivery platform, good load, rugged airframe. It lugged 500 and 1,000-pound bombs, rockets and drop tanks to range further and hit harder. Droop-snoot Lightnings even carried a glazed bombardier nose with a Norden bomb sight. The lead aircraft would aim and drop, with the rest of the P-38 formation toggling on the leader for precision attacks against bridges and rail yards. It wasn't glamorous, but it was decisive. Photo reconnaissance, eyes of the theatre. Unarmed F-4 and F-5 reconnaissance variants of the P-38 stripped guns for cameras. Speed plus altitude plus range meant they could photograph targets deep behind enemy lines and outrun most interceptors. Those images guided bombing campaigns, amphibious landings, and tactical strikes. Many recon pilots called the Lightning's speed and twin engines their best defense. If you took fire and lost power, you still had a chance to get home. Night fighting and special missions. The P-38M. Night Lightning arrived late, with a radar pod on the nose and a second crewman tucked behind the pilot. It saw limited combat due to timing, but it demonstrated the airframe's adaptability. Lightnings also served as pathfinder escorts, anti-shipping strikers with bombs and rockets, and even ad hoc courier aircraft for urgent parts and messages between forward bases. Engineering evolution, fixing flaws under fire, compressibility. Pilots discovered in 1941-1943 that high-speed dives could lock the tail and stiffen controls as airflow over the wing approached transonic speeds. The solution, dive recovery flaps under the wings, arrived on late J and L models. Pilots learned to deploy them before a plunge. The flaps changed the wing's pressure distribution, allowing safer pullouts. Training and procedures evolved with the hardware. By 1944-1945, Lightning units knew how to dive hard without succumbing to compressibility. Cold cockpits and engines surging in Europe. European winters exposed weak cockpit heating and, at times, power plant quirks at altitude. Lockheed, depot modifications, and updated operating procedures addressed the issues, including better canopy sealing, improved thermal management, and refined engine controls. As the P-51 took the lead in deep escort, many European P-38 groups leaned into missions less sensitive to those early weaknesses and more aligned with the Lightning's strengths. Production and performance by the numbers. Total built: approximately 10,037 P-38s of all variants. Typical armament: 1 X-20mm cannon plus 4 X-50 caliber Brownings in the nose, provision for up to 3,000 pounds of bombs or 10 HVAR rockets on later models. Speed: around 414 mph, P-38J at altitude. Climbing performance and service ceiling competitive with top contemporaries. Range: well over 1,000 miles with drop tanks. Ferry range of late models extended much farther, useful in Pacific Island hopping. Variants: P-38E FG early, P-38J, refined systems and cooling, P-38L, most numerous late war model with dive flaps and rockets, P-38M, night fighter, F4, F5, photo recon, and droop snoot, bombing lead. Designers: Hall Hibbard and Clarence L. Quay. Kelly Johnson at Lockheed. The Lightning was Johnson's first major fighter program before he led the famed Skunk Works. How Axis pilots adapted and what still scared them. Experienced Luftwaffe and IJN pilots learned not to get caught below a Lightning with energy to spare. They tried to drag P-38s into low-speed turning fights, where the Lightning's large wings and heavy control forces at high speed could be a disadvantage. The answer for P-38 pilots was discipline. Keep speed, use vertical maneuvers, and fight in pairs and fours. When used that way, the Lightning could pounce, kill, and leave before the enemy could exploit its weaknesses. Many Axis memoirs describe respect for the P-38's nose guns and the frustration of trying to chase a diving Lightning without overspeeding. Unit stories: Mediterranean, 8th and 15th Air Forces, and beyond. In the Mediterranean, the 82nd and 1st Fighter Groups flew deep, sometimes beyond what single-engine fighters could safely do in 1943. They escorted B-17s and B-24s to targets in Italy and the Balkans, fought fast-climbing Bf-109s and FW-190s, and learned to use the Lightning's altitude performance to enter and leave the fight on their terms. In Northwest Europe, P-38s in the 8th Air Force helped shoulder the escort burden during the critical 1943-early 1944 period, Regensburg, Schweinfurt, and the Big Week raids that hammered German aircraft production. When P-51s arrived in strength to push escort lines even farther, P-38s shifted to interdiction and tactical strikes for the 9th Air Force, where the Lightning's payload and stability were invaluable during and after the Normandy landings. In the Pacific, groups like the 49th, 475th, and 401st wrung everything out of the type, flying far, fighting often, and proving that careful energy tactics plus nose gun accuracy could dominate even nimble opponents. Bong and Maguire earned their scores not by turning tighter than a zero, but by never letting the zero choose the terms of the fight. Against ships, trains, and airfields, the P-38's ground attack resume was formidable. Those nose guns chewed up locomotives, rockets and bombs wrecked bridges and shipping. Parked aircraft fell to low-level sweeps. Like all low-altitude attackers, P-38s paid a price to flak, but survivability with two engines and a tough airframe saved many crews. Squadrons learned to coordinate with medium bombers and fighter bombers. Lightning slashed in to suppress flak and set targets ablaze while other aircraft followed up. Training, maintenance, and the logistics that win wars. No fighter succeeds on design alone. The Lightning's turbos, plumbing, and twin-engine systems demanded skilled ground crews. The U.S. wartime training pipeline and depot network matured alongside the aircraft. Engine swaps and turbo maintenance became routine. Pilots were taught strict engine management discipline, mixture, prop pitch, intercooler doors, and supercharger settings to avoid surging and overheating. In the Pacific, units learned to keep filters clean in dust and humidity, to seal electrics against rain, and to pre-flight fuel systems meticulously before long overwater sorties. Reconnaissance triumphs, intelligence that shaped operations, F4 and F5. Lightnings mapped beaches before landings, photographed factories and rail yards after raids to assess damage, and brought back imagery that planners used to pick bridge spans and choke points. In some theatres, unarmed Lightnings were the fastest thing at altitude. If a Me-262 jet appeared late in the war, the best tactic was to be somewhere else, an option speed often made possible. Comparisons: P-38 versus P-51 versus P-47. P-51. Mustang. Unmatched long-range escort in Europe. Superb high-altitude efficiency with the Merlin engine. If you must go to Berlin and back with a heavy bomber stream, the Mustang is king. P-47. Thunderbolt. The sledgehammer. Tough, with a ferocious dive and 8 50 caliber guns. An outstanding fighter bomber in the late war European campaign. P-38. Lightning, the specialist of reach and accuracy with twin-engine assurance. In the Pacific, it was the right airplane in the right place at the right time. In Europe, it carried the escort load before the Mustang arrived in numbers, then pivoted to missions that exploited its stability and payload. The P-38 produced the top two American aces of the war, Richard Thus Bong, 40, and Thomas B. Maguire Jr., 38, both in the Pacific. P-38 groups racked up air-to-air tallies in the Mediterranean even as they escorted deep and hit targets hard on the ground. Operation Vengeance, Yamamoto's shootdown, was a Lightning mission by necessity of range. It combined signals intelligence with a daring, precisely timed intercept that only the P-38 could execute from the available bases. Common myths: the P-38 couldn't dogfight. Reality: it wasn't a low-speed turn fighter like a Spitfire or Zero. It was an energy fighter, deadly when flown with altitude and speed, with a blistering dive and unmatched nose-gun accuracy. Pilots who played to its strengths won decisively. It was only good in the Pacific. Reality: the Lightning carried heavy escort burdens in the ETO early on and was highly effective in the Mediterranean and in tactical roles in Northwest Europe. The Pacific showcased its unique virtues, but Europe proved its versatility. Twin engines made it sluggish. Reality: at combat power and with the turbo advantage at altitude, the P-38 climbed and accelerated strongly. Control forces grew heavy at very high speed and roll rate lagged some single-engine fighters, but within its envelope the Lightning was formidable. Human cost and courage. Every success the P-38 achieved was paid for by crews who flew into flak and fighter swarms, often at the limits of fuel and endurance. Pilots in New Guinea climbed into cockpits still hot from tropical sun, then froze at altitude where oxygen masks frosted. European Lightning pilots scraped ice from canopies on cold dispersal strips and warmed hands over engine exhaust before startup. Ground crews worked in mud, rain and snow to keep the turbos spooling and the Allisons singing. The airplane's legend belongs to them. Late war refinements and the last push. The late model P-38L became the backbone variant. Dive recovery flaps standard, hardpoints for rockets, improved cockpit heating, better electrical systems, and small aerodynamic tweaks. In Europe, L models led interdiction sweeps after the Normandy landings, strangling bridges and rail yards. In the Pacific, P-38Ls escorted B-24s and B-25s on long hunts and swept ahead of amphibious landings. The P-38M night fighter, too late to be decisive, still showed the airframe's capacity for reinvention. After the war, legacy and lessons. When jet fighters took center stage, the Lightning's frontline career tapered. Yet its DNA, long-range thinking, concentrated fire, turbocharging for altitude, echoed in post-war design and doctrine. Reconnaissance Lightnings continued to serve briefly. Many surplus P-38s were scrapped. A few flew on in foreign air forces or civilian roles. Today, restored examples fly at air shows, twin booms gleaming, Allison engines thundering, a living reminder of a time when radical ideas became war-winning tools. Why the P-38 story matters. The Lightning proves that a fighter's value is not measured by a single metric, turn rate for example, but by how well it solves real operational problems. In 1942-1945, the problem was reach, how to escort farther, strike deeper, and bring pilots home across empty oceans. Another problem was accuracy, how to kill cleanly in a fast, violent engagement. The P-38's answers, 2 engines, turbos, nose guns, and disciplined energy tactics, were exactly right for many of the war's hardest missions. Key takeaways grounded in fact. Designed by Lockheed's Hibbard and Kelly Johnson, first flight 1939, early crash due to carburetor icing during a record attempt. Twin Allison V-1710s with turbos allowed speed and power at altitude. Nose-mounted 20mm plus 4.50s gave unmatched aiming accuracy. Early ETO issues, cold cockpit, engine surging, compressibility, were identified and mitigated. Late models added dive recovery flaps. Mediterranean and Pacific records were outstanding. The P-38 carried long-range escort duties until Mustangs arrived in force and then excelled as a fighter bomber and recon platform. Operation Vengeance and the Bong-Maguire scores demonstrate the Lightning's operational impact. Historical debates about individual kill credits exist, but the mission outcomes are well documented. Production exceeded 10,000. The P-38 became one of the most influential American fighters of WWII. Thank you for watching and listening. If this deep dive into the P-38 Lightning helped bring World War II's air war to life for you, please hit the like button, share your thoughts and questions in the comments, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episode. Your support lets us keep telling honest, gripping stories from history's most decisive moments.